She came barefoot, dust rising with every step she took through the dry clay paths of San Giustino. Her dress clung to her legs, damp with sweat and shame, and her long hair clumped at her temples from days without washing. Maribel walked toward the small adobe church at the center of the village, just as the morning bell rang out for Mass. It was Sunday, a holy day. Families gathered in their best clothes, murmuring psalms under their breath. But when she stepped onto the stone steps of the chapel, the mood shifted. Whispers swept through the crowd like wildfire. "Isn't that her? She shouldn't be here. She's cursed." Mothers pulled their children close. Men lowered their hats, not in respect, but in disdain. And then the priest came forward, robes heavy with golden embroidery, his face twisted with righteous fury. "You cannot enter here," he said loudly, his voice echoing. "This is the house of God. It will not be defiled by a woman who lives in sin. Your kind is not welcome." Maribel stood frozen, her lips parted to speak but no sound came. Faces she once called neighbors now turned away in disgust. The priest slammed the chapel doors closed, right in front of her. She didn't cry, not yet. She turned slowly and walked away from the chapel, across the town square and down toward the dry stream bed at the edge of the hills. There, beneath a bent mesquite tree, she knelt by a shallow trickle of water and began to wash the dust from her feet that had carried her through too much judgment, too much silence. That's when she noticed him. A man, or what looked like a man, standing just a few feet away. He was old, with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that seemed untouched by time. He wore a tattered cloak, carried a carved staff, and stood with the stillness of someone who had walked many lifetimes. "May I sit with you, child?" he asked, voice gentle, almost reverent. She didn't answer, just nodded. He eased down beside her with the care of someone who knew pain. From the folds of his cloak, he pulled out a crust of bread and broke it in half, offering her one piece. "I have nothing to give you in return," she said. Her voice cracked. "It's not for sale," he replied. "It's shared." She accepted the bread without meeting his eyes. Something about the way he looked at her, like he wasn't afraid of her filth, her story, her shame, made her chest ache. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucien," he said. "Like the Pope." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "So what are you now? A madman who thinks he's the Pope?" He smiled, eyes crinkling softly. "Perhaps. Or maybe I once was, before Florence forgot what mercy looks like." The stream gurgled faintly beside them. She looked down at her feet, still caked in old blood and dust. "What did you see when you looked at me?" she asked, not sure why she even needed the answer. He didn't speak for a long time. Then softly, he said, "I saw a woman who has been broken by men and still tries to stand. That is holier than any stone altar." Maribel turned her face away, not because she was ashamed of what he said, but because it had been so long since anyone had called her anything other than dirty. Behind them, the church bell stopped ringing, and still, beside a dying stream and a strange old man, something inside her began to stir. Not hope, not yet, but the memory of it. The next morning, Maribel woke to the soft creak of footsteps nearby. She had slept curled up beneath the same mesquite tree, her shawl pulled tight against the desert chill. When she opened her eyes, the old man was already awake, crouching by the stream with his hands cupped in the water. He didn't speak until she sat up. "You sleep like someone who expects to be woken by pain," he said gently. She frowned, rubbing her arms. "Habit." Lucien walked toward her, slow but steady, and sat again at her side. In the sunlight she noticed a strange shimmer on his right hand. When he adjusted his cloak, the light caught something gold, a ring. She stared. It was thick, old, carved with a symbol she hadn't seen since she was a child, a cross with crossed keys beneath it. "That's a papal ring," she said under her breath. He looked down at it, almost surprised. "Yes, the real one, I think. It hasn't fit properly in years, but I still carry it." "Where did you get that?" she demanded, suddenly suspicious. "I told you," he replied with calm simplicity. "I used to be the Pope, not the one on the balcony in silk robes. The other one, the one who got chased out when he started washing the feet of people like you." She let out a disbelieving scoff, but something in his voice stopped her from laughing. "You expect me to believe Florence cast you out for helping the poor?" Lucien shrugged. "It wasn't just the poor, it was the broke, the shamed, the ones no church would open its doors for. They called it rebellion. I called it gospel." She studied him carefully now. His face was worn, yes, but not crazed. His eyes had none of the wild look of a drifter. only sorrow deeply planted, and the ring. It was too detailed to be fake, too sacred to be bought. Still, her pride made her spit the words out. You think you can appear and save me? No, he said quietly. I think maybe you'll save me. The weight of that landed harder than she expected. She turned away, hiding the flicker of confusion in her expression. I don't need saving, she muttered. I know, he answered. That's why you're the one who deserves it. They sat in silence for a long while. Birds circled overhead. The stream whispered at their feet. Finally, Maribel asked the question that had haunted her since yesterday. Why did you wash my feet? He looked at her solemn. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. That evening, the desert cooled quickly, painting the sky with streaks of violet and gold. Maribel sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring into a small fire they had built from dry mesquite branches. Lucien sat across from her, his hands folded like he was praying, though no words escaped his lips. She didn't want to speak, but silence when it stretched too long started scraping the inside of her ribs. You want to know what they say about me? She asked, not looking up. Lucien didn't move. Only if you want me to hear it. She reached for a stick and began poking the fire, sending small sparks into the night. They say I killed my husband. Lucien didn't flinch. They say I seduced a traveling preacher, that I poisoned my own father, that I lay with devils in my sleep, all kinds of things. But the worst one, the one they whisper loudest, is that I liked it, that I liked being wicked. She laughed bitterly. You ever hear anything that's stupid in Florence? He nodded slowly. Every day, just with better Latin. She dropped the stick, hands clenched now. My husband, he was a hunter, drank like the world owed him something. He used to lock me in the root cellar when he didn't like my tone, said the dark, was holy because it made a woman quiet. Her voice broke, but she pressed on. One day, he came home angry, said he'd lost his rifle in a poker game. Thought I was laughing. I wasn't, but that didn't stop him. He dragged me by the hair out to the cliff, told me I'd learn to fly or I'd learn to die. Her hands trembled now. I didn't push him, not really. I just twisted. He lost his footing. The rocks took care of the rest. Lucien's expression didn't change. He didn't lean back or frown. He only listened. I buried him, she said. Didn't tell anyone, but they knew. They always know when a woman survives something she wasn't supposed to. The fire crackled between them, the only sound for several seconds. You think that makes me evil? She asked, looking him straight in the eyes for the first time. No, he said. I think it makes you human and tired. She swallowed hard, throat thick with emotion. You don't even know me. Lucien smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. I know enough. I know pain when I see it, and I know that wounds don't have to bleed to be fatal. The stars were visible now, glittering against the deep blue sky. And what about your wounds? She asked him. Did they bleed? Lucien looked up toward the heavens. Mine bled in silence, and the world called it wisdom. They sat until the fire burned low, wrapped in the kind of stillness that doesn't demand answers, just presence. Dawn came quietly, slipping over the hills like a breath held too long. The sun was still shy when Maribel woke to the sound of water being poured, not the lazy trickle of the dry creek, but the purposeful sound of hands scooping and cupping, like someone preparing for something sacred. She opened her eyes and found Lucien kneeling beside the stream, his cloak draped over a rock, sleeves rolled past his elbows. Before him sat a shallow metal basin, dented and old, filled with water he had gathered stone by stone. Maribel sat up slowly, blinking. What are you doing? Lucien didn't look at her. He kept pouring, hands slow and reverent. I'm preparing a sacrament, he said softly. She blinked. A what? He turned to her then, eyes solemn but kind. A ritual older than temples, older than guilt, one the church no longer remembers. How to do right. He gestured to a flat stone beside the basin. Sit. She hesitated. No. Why not? Because I'm not clean, she snapped. I've never been clean. He stood, walked toward her, not with force but with patience, like someone approaching a wounded animal. You let them call you dirty for so long you started saying it for them. She shook her head. This won't fix me. No, he said gently, but it might remind you you're not broken. And something inside her, some rope long frayed, snapped. She rose, legs shaking, and sat on the stone. He knelt before her, took her feet in his hands and dipped them into the base. The water was cold, but his touch was warm. He didn't flinch at the cracks in her heels, the darkened scars, the dust pressed deep into her skin. He didn't rush. He washed her like it mattered. Her eyes burned. When he dried her feet with the edge of his cloak, she bit down on her lip to keep from sobbing, and then he kissed the top of each foot, lightly, as if returning something the world had stolen. "I've never seen you cry," he said, not as a question but a knowing. "I forgot how," she whispered. The sun rose behind them, casting gold onto the basin's surface, and from the hills above someone watched. A farm boy on his way to fetch water. He stared, wide-eyed, then ran back to the village, whispering the strangest story he'd ever seen. The dirty woman, the old man. He washed her feet like she was a queen. By noon the next day, San Giustino was buzzing like a disturbed nest. Whispers turned to rumors. Rumors turned to fire. She let him touch her feet. They say he kissed them like a priest at the altar. He claims to be the Pope. No, not a Pope. The Pope, says Florence, cast him out. It didn't take long for Father Matteo to summon the villagers to the square. The church doors were flung open, not for worship but for accusation. From the stone steps beneath the cracked bell tower, the priest stood in full vestments, his voice slicing through the hot air like a whip. "Today we confront heresy in flesh and bone." Dozens gathered, their faces flushed, not from heat, but from the adrenaline of judgment. Men gripped their belts like they might need to draw a weapon. Women clutched rosaries and whispered prayers that sounded more like warnings. And from the far edge of the square, Maribel stood hidden behind a fruit cart, breath shallow, heart pounding. She had not wanted to return, but something in her told her she had to witness what would happen next. Not for him, for herself. Lucien arrived late, walking slowly without fear, his robes dusty, his beard gently swaying in the wind. He didn't stop until he stood directly in front of Father Matteo. "I know you," the priest sneered. "You've poisoned this town with your lies." "I've offered truth," Lucien replied calmly. "You're free to reject it." Ignacio raised his voice. "You desecrated the sacred by kneeling before a known sinner. You washed her feet like a dog honoring its master." A collective gasp surged through the crowd, the kind of gasp that means nothing and everything all at once. Lucien's gaze swept over the townspeople. His eyes weren't angry, just tired, deeply tired. "You call her unclean," he said, voice carrying across the plaza. "You lock your doors to her, you shame her name at every dinner table, and yet none of you ever asked what broke her." Ding. He paused. The silence that followed was painful. "I was once among men who wore white robes and gold rings. They called themselves the guardians of heaven, but they forgot how to kneel. They forgot how to listen. So I left." Ignacio pointed a finger like a blade. "And where did you go?" Lucien looked at Maribel then, just briefly. "To the ones they left behind." The priest's voice climbed again. "You think you're a holy man? You're a madman. A danger." Lucien nodded slowly. "Then let the mad speak once before you burn him." The crowd didn't move. Neither did Ignacio. So Lucien climbed the first step of the church and turned to face them all. "This church," he began, "was not built by saints. It was built by widows and beggars, by men who lost their way, and women who were never given one." He raised the gold ring on his hand and held it high, not as a crown but as a question. "If this means I have power, then let me use it once to remind you. Holiness is not found in silk robes. It's found in hands that heal, in words that don't condemn, in feet that still walk forward, even after the world has crushed them." A woman in the crowd sobbed. No one turned to comfort her. "You speak of the Lord," Lucien continued. "But what God casts out a woman for survival? What shepherd abandons a sheep because she limps when she walks?" His voice cracked just barely. "You want to protect the altar from the impure. But the altar was made for the impure." No one clapped. No one shouted amen. Just silence. Heavy, inescapable. Maribel's throat burned. She didn't know when the tears had started, only that they were real and they refused to stop. Lucien stepped down, nodded once to the walked away. No one stopped him. No one dared. And in that moment, the square of San Giustino, so used to judgment, was left with something far more dangerous than heresy: doubt. They didn't speak for hours. After the sermon, Lucien had walked back into the hills without saying a word. Maribel followed at a distance, not because she was afraid, but because something in her told her this silence wasn't meant to be broken. Not yet. They reached the grove where the stream curved like a ribbon around scattered stones. The sun was low, birds silent. The wind moved through the grass as if listening. He sat under the mesquite tree and removed his sandals, wincing as he did. Maribel finally approached. She carried nothing but her voice. "They'll come for you soon," Lucien nodded. "I know. Why aren't you running?" "Because the truth doesn't run. Only lies do." She sat beside him, folding her skirt under her legs. For a while neither of them looked at the other. Then slowly, she said, "I saw your hand during this sermon, the way you held that ring." He didn't respond. "I've seen that gesture before," she continued. "Years ago, my grandfather took me to a cathedral when I was a child, a real one, in a city far from here. I saw a bishop raise his hand just like that and the people knelt. Even my grandfather knelt." Lucien's gaze stayed on the horizon. "It was the way your voice changed too," she said. "Not loud, but it filled everything." He smiled faintly, almost sad. "They trained us for that." "Who?" she asked. He turned to her then, finally, and from the folds of his cloak he pulled a bundle wrapped in linen. Slowly, he unwrapped. Inside was a letter, aged, yellowed. The edges curled like fire had once kissed them. The seal was still intact, red wax with the emblem of crossed keys and a triple crown. Maribel's breath caught. She reached for the parchment, but he pulled, just out of reach. "Read it with your ears," he said, "not your hands." And then, without opening the letter, he recited from memory, "To His Holiness, Lucien of Veronia, by order of the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, you are hereby stripped of all titles, honors, and protection. Your actions in Florence, Naples, and beyond, providing shelter to the excommunicated, embracing the condemned, performing rites on those declared unworthy, are in direct defiance of the magisterium. You are to leave the Holy See within 48 hours. No further appeal will be granted. Let silence be your final prayer." He lowered the letter. His voice had not wavered, but something in him had. "I kept it," he said, "because it was the last thing Florence ever gave me, and the only thing I didn't regret receiving." Maribel didn't know what to say. Her heart pounded in her chest. "They exiled you," she whispered. "For mercy." He nodded. "They told me love was dangerous, that compassion breeds disobedience, that washing the feet of whores and lepers made me unfit to lead." His eyes glistened, but he didn't blink. "But if leadership demands blindness, then I'd rather be forgotten." He wrapped the letter again slowly, and tucked it back to his cloak. Maribel reached out, placed her hand gently over his. "You're not forgotten," she said. He looked at her, not as a savior, not as a priest, not as a pope, but as a man, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition, the kind that only happens when two broken people stop trying to hide the crack. She leaned back against the tree beside him. The sky above them deepened into indigo. "Do you miss it?" she asked after a while. "Florence." He thought for a long moment. "I miss what it could have been." And then, in a voice barely louder than the wind, "But I found something holier here." She looked at him, puzzled. "You." The days had grown quieter since the sermon, not because the town had accepted Lucien or forgiven Maribel, but because silence often follows fear. Fear of truth, fear of what it reveals, and fear of seeing yourself in someone you were told to hate. The villagers no longer shouted when she passed, but they didn't speak to her either. They turned away, fast and ashamed, as if the sight of her carried a weight they didn't want to feel. At night, the hills became her sanctuary. The stars above seemed closer there, unfiltered by judgment, and the sound of Lucien's slow, deliberate breathing beside the fire gave her a sense of safety. But peace has a price, and sometimes the heart demands you pay it. That evening, under a sky thick with stars, Maribel sat across from Lucien as he prepared a small pot of beans. The flames danced in his eyes, but his hands moved slowly, his strength waning, though he never spoke of it. She stared into the soul fire for a long while before speaking. "I lied to you." He didn't look up. "I told you my husband fell, that it was an accident." Lucien stirred the pot once, then paused. "You said you twisted away." "I did," she said, "but that wasn't the end of it." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "He didn't die from the fall." Now Lucien looked at he broke his leg, cried like an animal, begged me to help him. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't stop. "He told me if I saved him he'd forgive me, that he'd forget everything, that I'd be his wife again, just as before, in the cellar, in the dark." She looked away, her fists clenched in her lap. "I left him there, walked away. I heard the coyotes hours later. I never went back." The silence that followed was unbearable. She wiped her face with her sleeve. "You want to know the worst part?" she said, barely audible. I felt relieved. Lucien sat still, not shocked, not horrified, just present. "You said before," she continued, "that holiness lives in the broken. But what if what's broken in me can't be healed? What if it was never clean to begin with?" Lucien reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a worn, wooden crucifix. Not golden, not polished, just raw wood darkened by time and handling. He handed it to her. "This," he said, "was carved by a prisoner. A man who murdered someone in front of a crowd. No trial, no defense, he admitted. Soon as she looked at the cross, the edges were chipped. The figure of Christ was barely visible. He carved this with a spoon, Lucien continued, because even he believed that something broken can still be made into something sacred. She ran her fingers over the rough surface, her tears now falling freely. I'm not that man, she whispered. No, Lucien said, you're the woman who lived. That's even harder. He leaned forward, gently took her hand and placed it over the crucifix. Your sin, he said, was survival, and I will never call that unholy. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, only cry. The kind of crying that breaks something loose inside you, the kind that says now you're finally telling the truth. He sat beside her and let her cry until the fire burned low. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and he didn't offer it, because what passed between them wasn't absolution, it was understanding. The smoke came first, a thin ribbon of gray rising into the evening sky, curling like a question over the rooftops of San Giustino. Then came the sound, muffled at first, then sharper, angrier, the clatter of feet, the thud of fists on doors, voices calling names that weren't theirs to call. Maribel heard it from the hills. She stood quickly, heart pounding. The light of the fire flickered across Lucien's face, but he didn't move. They've started something, she whispered. He nodded. Yes. She waited for him to rise, to flee, to hide, but he just looked at the sky, calm as if listening for God. Lucien, she said urgently, you have to go. They'll hurt you. They're not coming for me, he said quietly. And then, they're coming for the idea of me. She stared at him, not understanding. He turned to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Let them come. The truth has survived worse. They didn't have to wait long. A boy, no older than 12, came running up the hill, breathless, face streaked with ash. He was barefoot and trembling. They say you cursed the town, he cried to Lucien. They say you're a devil in robes. They're burning the chapel, your chapel. They say you and the woman did it. Maribel's mouth dropped open. What? The boy nodded. They're marching up here now, with ropes. Lucien didn't blink. He turned to Maribel, voice soft as a psalm. You don't have to stay. I'm not leaving you, she said. He smiled. Then we faced them together. By the time the crowd appeared, torches in hand, the sun had nearly disappeared. The last light of day clung to the sky like hope clings to memory. Father Matteo led the mob, sweat glistening on his brow, his voice hoarse from shouting. Behind him came men with axes, women with stones, children with empty eyes, mirroring their parents' fear. There they are, someone cried. The whore and the heretic. Bind him. Maribel stepped in front of Lucien, arms wide. He didn't do anything. A rock struck the ground inches from her feet. Out of the way. A man barked, but she didn't move. Then from the far end of the mob, a voice rang out, clear, high and terrified. Stop! Everyone turned. It was the same boy, the one who had warned them. He stood alone, arms shaking, eyes wide. He gave my mama food when no one else would. When she was dying, he held her hand. He said her name like it mattered. Someone tried to hush him, but the boy raised his voice louder. He washed her feet too, because she hadn't felt clean in years. A murmur spread through the crowd, then another voice. An old man hobbling forward. He prayed with me. When my son was lost to drink, he didn't call him wicked. He said let him come home when he's ready. No priest ever said that to me. Then slowly another woman stepped forward, and another, each with a story. A moment, a kind. The torches didn't go out, but they were lowered. Father Ignacio's face turned pale. Lucien stood calmly, looking not at his accusers but at the ones he had touched without asking for anything in return. I am not here to be your pope, he said. I am here to remind you what a real one should have been. No one spoke. No one moved. Then finally, the priest turned and walked away, robes dragging in the dust. One by one, the villagers followed. The fire in the chapel burned on, but no one celebrated. And on the hill, Maribel collapsed to her knees, shaking. Lucien knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms, not as a prophet, not as a savior, but as someone who knew what it was to burn. The fire in the chapel burned through the night. By morning, only the stone steps remained. The altar had collapsed into ash. The cross that once hung above it lay cracked, half buried beneath blackened beams. The air in San Giustino was thick with the scent of smoke and something else, guilt. No one rebuilt. No one spoke of it again. They simply lived around the ruins, as if pretending the church had never stood there would somehow erase what they'd done. But up in the hills, beneath the bent mesquite, another kind of sanctuary had taken shape. Lucien hadn't risen from his bedroll that morning, or the next. His breathing had become shallow, his words sparse. He no longer spoke of Florence or exile, or sin. He only asked for water and sunlight. And Maribel, she barely left his side. She wrapped his feet in cloth soaked in lavender, changed the linens, held his hand. Each night she listened to the rattle in his chest, and prayed it would not be the last. But on the fourth day, she woke to find him awake and smiling faintly. "I had a dream," he whispered. She leaned close. "Tell me." "I saw a long corridor lined with candles. No thrones, no gold, just people, all the people I failed to save, waiting, smiling." She brushed the sweat from his brow. "They were never lost. They just waited for you." He turned his head slowly, painfully. "You were there too." She paused. "Me? You weren't waiting," he said. "You were washing someone's feet." Maribel's throat tightened. "I don't deserve that." "Yes," he said. "You do. You became what they feared you might. Someone who heals." He reached weakly into the folds of his robe. His hand trembled. Maribel helped him pull something out. The ring. The one with the papal seal. Gold worn. A bit too large for any finger now. He pressed it into her palm. "It's not a crown," he said. "It's a key. Not to heaven. To the heart." She held it, stunned. "I'm not holy," she whispered. "You're human. That's holier." She smiled through tears. "Don't go yet." "I have to," he said softly. "But I'll leave the door open." His breath slowed. She leaned closer, cradling his face. "Lucien?" His eyes blinked once, then again, then stopped. And with that, no thunder, no angels, no bells. Lucien of Veronia, the forgotten pope, the barefoot prophet of the hills, was gone. Maribel sat in silence, not crying, just being. She took the crucifix he always carried, and placed it over his heart. Then she folded his hands, kissed his forehead, and whispered the last rite in a voice only he would have known. That night, the wind changed direction. A soft breeze swept through the hills, as if carrying his breath upward. One final time. Months passed. The ashes of the old chapel in San Justino were never cleared. Weeds crept over the broken stones. Children stopped playing near it, afraid of what the silence might still be saying. But further up the hill, something new had begun to rise, not with fanfare, not with offerings, but with bare hands, sweat, and faith that had nothing to do with permission. Maribel worked alone. Day after day she gathered stones from the dry riverbed. She built low walls from sun-baked mud and driftwood. The roof was patched with old canvas and stitched animal hides. It had no pews, just mats woven from straw. It smelled of sage, dust and smoke. But it was hers. The people called it her hut at first, then her shrine, then finally the little church. She never placed a cross on the roof. Instead, she hung a single object from the entrance, just above. The doorframe, Lucien's ring tied with a strip of cloth from the robe he died in. It glinted faintly in the morning sun, like a quiet bell that never rang. She didn't preach, she didn't convert. She simply left the door open, and slowly they came. First the widow who had lost 2 sons to the mines. Then the young man who'd been whipped for kissing another boy. Then the woman everyone whispered was barren, cursed. Then children carrying questions too big for their homes. They came without needing to believe, without needing to confess. They came because no one turned them away. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they sang. Sometimes they cried. And sometimes, when no one was looking, Maribel washed their feet, not because she thought it made them clean, but because she knew what it meant to be seen. One evening a traveler arrived, a stranger wrapped in a cloak, face weathered, hands blistered. He asked for shelter. She welcomed him. He didn't say where he came from, but before he left he knelt and touched the ring above the door. "I heard a story about a man," he said, "who gave away his crown to give someone back their name." Maribel nodded, smiling softly. "It wasn't a crown," she said. "It was a mirror." That night she sat outside the chapel beneath the same bent mesquite where she had once believed she was cursed. The stars blinked above her, silent and vast. She laid back against the roots and closed her eyes. She remembered his voice, the way he spoke low and slow as if each word were a prayer trying to become real. She remembered his hands, how they didn't flinch. And she remembered the last thing he ever said, "You became what they feared you might." She smiled at the sky, because now she understood. They feared that if she ever healed, she might show others how to do the same. And she did, not with sermons, not with miracles, but with water, with hands, and with a door that was never locked. Sometimes the holiest people are the ones we never notice. They don't wear robes. They don't speak from pulpits. They simply show up when the rest of the world turns away. This story wasn't just about a forgotten pope or a rejected woman. It was about what happens when grace chooses the outcast, when dignity is restored not by power but by presence, and when the most sacred act is the decision to stay. Now we ask you, have you ever been seen by someone when you felt invisible, or have you ever been the one to see someone others had forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, honor and redemption.